Thank you all for joining for today's webinar. I appreciate you all taking time out of your busy schedules. Today we'll be talking about railroading contractor responsibility and oversight for roadway worker safety. Before we get started, just a couple of things for those of you who's using RailTasker. Our RWP training is now available in Spanish. We're excited to be able to offer that. It is pretty newly, we released it a week or two ago. You may not realize it's there. Since it kind of related to today's topic, we have some additional webinars coming up, open to everybody. The next one's going to be with Patrice Kelly to talk about the new oral fluids testing rule. That will be a fantastic webinar. After that, Holly will be walking through our onboarding modules. You can get a peek if you're not currently a TPA client, what that's all about, or maybe you are and you want to learn more about that. Then we'll be revisiting 243 again back in October to start talking about refresher training, which certainly we're in the middle of that first refresher training cycle, and we can dive in to some more specific topics within that, and especially as it relates to some of the templates that I have in case you have specific questions on that. With that said, today we have Lance Hawks joining us. Lance is currently the Human Performance Specialist with the Safety Partnerships Division at FRA, which is also the same group that's responsible for Part 243. And then prior to that, many of you may know that Lance also was this track safety specialist. He was definitely very involved with Part 214. And I know I've seen him speak on RMM safety at several events. And this is a topic that he's been working on for quite some time. And for those of you who may not know me, my name is Katie Inouye, and I am the CEO and founder of Spark TS. And also I've been working on Part 243 for some time as well. So, today's agenda, we're gonna start, Lance is gonna kick us off talking about FAMES and what that means based on our topic today, and then some practical safety top conversation around RMMs working around roadway maintenance machines. And then the two of us all lead the way on the 243, but we'll let Lance keep me honest and add anything that I may not be thinking about when we talk about specifically periodic oversight and then that contractor versus railroad requirements within the regulation. I'll let you take it from there.
All right, well, good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're at. Appreciate you guys getting on this call, and thank you, Katie, for inviting me for this. It's an important topic. Again, I think Katie said it. I'm with the FRA. I've been in the industry for about 26 years now, since '97. Been around RWP for a good bit. Really appreciate the subject and taking the time. It's important to get it out to the folks. This first slide here is about roadway worker fatalities, and we're kind of holding this based off of the 2023 fatality we just recently had on a short line. This is slides going back to 2016, but essentially we averaged since 1997 when the rule came out, 3 fatalities a year. We've done better since the rule was implemented in 97, but you know, we've like 2019, we've had a 0, we've had some other zeros. So it's definitely possible to get zeros. So that's kind of what we're striving for. And that really drives us into the next slide, into the FAMES portion of it. FAMES, many folks still in the industry, I think if you asked basic roadway worker, they probably wouldn't know what FAMES is, and we're trying to work on getting that addressed. It's the fatality analysis of maintenance way employees and signalmen. This was brought up, committee was formed, the FRA, with labor and management representatives as an ad hoc voluntary consensus-based committee. The FAMES committee analyzes the data, focuses on trends, and its whole goal is to reduce any roadway worker fatalities. This last statement in this slide, I think everybody in the FAMES committee takes very, very seriously. The FAMES committee dedicates its efforts to all the roadway workers who have lost their lives in the performance and duties, and to the families and loved ones and co-workers left behind. The purpose and scope of FAMES, again, is to achieve a goal of 0 roadway worker fatalities. I think we've had that 3 times, as I said. It's possible by identifying risk factors through data analysis, presenting and analyzing and findings of FAMES to you, the railroad worker, and providing recommendations on improving the safety of roadway workers, providing recommendations to eliminate roadway worker fatalities at highway grade crossings that are not classified as RWP events, encouraging implementation of improved safety practices. FAMES analyzes data related to the roadway worker fatalities. All FAMES activities and discussions are confidential and not available outside the committee. When we go into the committee, the first rule is you have to take off your hat, right? You can't, I come in there as I was the RWP specialist, and it didn't, there was no hierarchy, there's no hierarchy in there at all. As far as, you know, everybody has a say. You're not representing your agency or your employer. You're representing that, like we said in that last statement, it's in dedication of the lost roadway worker. We're trying to make sure that that doesn't happen again, and that's the intent, that's the goal for FAMES. Next slide, please. This alert here, we've started coming out with alerts, and we have alerts and reports, and alerts are a little bit shorter and more to the point, and the actual reports go into the findings of when we review the accidents. Can you read that out there? And this is kind of the intent of this meeting, was this last FAMES thing.
So
Yeah.
at approximately 11 o'clock Eastern, a roadway maintenance machine was traveling in a north direction when it struck and seriously injured a roadway worker. The injured employee was transported to a hospital by medevac and succumbed to his injuries later that day. The work group was installing rail fasteners to complete the installation of continuous welded rail in the area. The operated machine was traveling to the site in a reverse direction with 2 people occupying the operating area. There were 2 roadway workers on the ground following the track. One of the 2 roadway workers on the ground at the accident site cleared from the track. The second worker was operating a leaf blower and remained in the foul of the track. The worker that remained clear shouted to the following employee to clear, but ultimately he didn't clear and was fatally injured.
Thank you, Katie. That's kind of what we've been doing on any of these accidents. We'll send out something that way. You know, it's good to get out into the field so people understand this. This particular machine was actually looks to me like a converted spiker, and it was doing lagging operations. They converted the workheads for lagging machines. It kind of still blows my mind. There was no obstructions behind them. The machine was open. It was just, I mean, just a crazy, ridiculous thing on both sides. So that's kind of, and it's going to go into what we're going to talk about a lot, is roadway worker safety around roadway maintenance machines. And I'll get a link on the bottom here for you to, that's where it'll take you straight to the FAMES page. Again, we encourage you to take these and decipher this information, get it out to the hands of your folks.
Yeah, I'll say, Lance, if I can real quick. For those of you, there is a copy of this presentation in the handout section, so you can download that and then have access to those links.
Here's the reports, and this is all when you go onto the FAMES web page, you'll find all this. Here's all the notes. I think this is a must read, at least for this presentation we're given, is the fatal striking accidents with roadway maintenance machines present. So it's pretty staggering how that does that. But there's all these reports are really good, you know, in your safety briefings to, you know, pick one out a month or however you want to do it, but just get this information out to your employees. Next slide. And this is safety around roadway maintenance machines. I put out one, since with the FRI, I put out an RWP fatality quarterly report. Usually it's hopefully not quarterly, but I've been trying to stick to whenever there's a fatality, and it kind of goes a quarterly basis. Here's some of the notes we pulled from that. It's many recent roadway worker fatalities involved a RMM striking roadway workers working near a machine. This continues to be an area of concern, and here's the key that I want everybody to understand is working around RMMs is a regulated function of on-track safety as defined in 214.341. When you look at 214.341, it says roadway maintenance machines. That's the heading in it. And it's kind of misleading and probably not worded the best, right? It is about roadway maintenance machines, and most people will look at that and say, well, that's about the operator, right? And it's not. So it's really telling the railroad that you need to have procedures for your operators of machines and those who work near the machines, procedures to work safely around those. And then every railroad has their own procedures that they dictate. Some railroads don't allow roadway workers to work in the work zone at all, right? Like if I'm operating a backhoe and you get in my red zone, some railroads require them to take their hands off, put it neutral, quit, and that's it. There is no other work. I know I was a backhoe operator, so that gives me a little bit of heartburn from a practical application, but from a safety standpoint, I don't think you can argue, right? FRA inspectors and railroad managers are encouraged to stop and question what on-track safety procedures are being utilized when they encounter roadway workers working around RMMs. Roadway workers working around RMMs must know and follow the railroad's safety procedures for working around RMMs. Again, that differs between railroad to railroad. These responsibilities apply to both RMM operators and the roadway worker working near the machine. When I was reviewing on-track safety programs of railroads, and a lot of the railroads had their rule for that was essentially put all the responsibility on the operator. Like the operator, you can't get within 15 feet of anything, basically, right? But that's really, you know, like I said, I was a backhoe operator. I operated boom trucks and a bunch of other machines. It's really wouldn't be my fault if I'm operating a backhoe and somebody comes and gets in my blind spot and I don't know about it, right? I can't control that. We've had a lot of these railroads change and draft the rules to where there's an onus on both parties responsible, because it is a joint responsibility. Communication between the RMM operators and the roadway workers working near the machine is critical, and the failure to establish and follow safe procedures can be catastrophic, and often is. I think right now 80% of our most recent fatalities out of the last 10, so 8 out of 10 have involved a roadway worker being struck by a machine. That's just too many. Basic requirements for working around roadway maintenance machines. Do not accept a task that you are not qualified to do. This has happened. I don't think it happens a ton, but it's happened where you get on the machine and you're not qualified to do so. Don't do that. As a matter of fact, don't do anything that you're not trained to do. That's what 343A is all about. The employer really is not supposed to assign you a task, and you're not supposed to accept a task. So again, we got this throughout 214. You got this joint, venture, right? It's your safety and the employer's responsibility for it as well. Receive training, the required training to work on or around machines. And when I say this, I'm going to reemphasize, it's not just training for a machine operator. You have to be trained to be around a roadway maintenance machine. This is misunderstood. This needs to be clarified and really understood by the industry. Know and understand the on-track safety rules of the railroads you're working, and establish communication in accordance with your railroad's on-track safety program when working around machines. What are good safety procedures while working around or on or near roadway maintenance machines? Have a way to communicate if the roadway worker will enter the work zone of the RMM or vice versa. Kind of touched on that briefly before. Conduct a job briefing. Make sure you understand the tasks at hand. Make sure you know what moves are expected while working on the ground near an RMM. If a roadway worker is working near an RMM, the operator should always have clear view of the roadway worker. You don't hit things that you see, right? If you're an operator and you get somebody working in your red zone and that's allowed by your railroad safety procedures, fine. But if you lose sight of them, stop. It's common sense. Stop the movements. Make sure, regroup, get everything figured out. That's a big one. And for the railroad managers or contract managers out there that have these, make sure that these procedures are in your railroad's on-track safety program. If they're not, bring it to the attention, because these are your employees out here. If the operator fails to see the roadway worker, operations should stop immediately. Understand how the roadway worker and RMM operator are going to communicate. If hand signals are used, ensure all involved clearly understand the meaning of each signal. We got a lot of times too, I've seen in training, you train the operator, but then the operator is going to need a signal person right out there. And a lot of times the signal person is not trained for anything. They don't know any hand signals. So make sure, if it brings me to another point. If you're operating, lifting and rigging, you're handling taglines, you're doing things of that nature, that's you should be trained to do that. There's a whole OSHA has a whole thing for lifting and rigging. I mean, it can be a complex task. So make sure that we're trained to do that. Avoid placing yourself in the path of stored energy. This happened, I wrote this down because of a fatality where you had a boom was hooked to a piece of pulling a cap out of a bridge, and it was stuck, and they were unprying it, and there was folks right in the way of that. I mean, it was ridiculous what was going on, but they put themselves in the path of stored energy. They finally did break it loose, and obviously the machine did what the machine's going to do when it stores energy. It's going to release it. And it released it, knocked the person off the scaffolding, and he fell to his death. Never walk under a suspended load. This is a recent fatality happened with the switch point. They had a tagline, short tagline from what my understanding, and the tagline broke, the switch point fell and hit the employee. Make sure you don't get under a suspended load. I don't even know why we have to say that, but we apparently have to say that. Always ensure your safety appliances are functioning on an RMM. Properly tag defective conditions. We also had a recent fatality where a rail spiker backed over a contractor. When we did the accident investigation, we realized that the backup alarm wasn't functioning. I mean, would that have saved him? I think it's reasonable to say maybe, right? Make sure that your safety appliances are functioning. When not in use, lower the workheads to prevent movements. If that's what your railroad's procedures call you to do, at least make sure you've secured it in some way, somehow.
Great. Right. Thanks, Lance. Just to take through that from the 214, we're now just kind of changing gears a little bit to talk about periodic oversight within Part 243. And, many of you have seen me maybe speak on this before, but oftentimes we don't take a step back and even talk about why do the periodic oversight, or why this part of the requirements were added to the regulation. Some text here from the regulation that it's required for the employer. When it says employer, that was going to just mean right away both the contractor and the railroad, and we can talk a little bit more about that. That they're required to conduct periodic oversight tests and inspections. And it's really for the purposes of determining if the safety-related railroad employees are complying with federal railroad safety laws, regulations, and orders, which is the scope of 243. So safety-related, that's actually the definition of a safety-related task, is federal railroad safety laws, regulations, and orders. Specific to that FRA-regulated person or work group safety, personnel or work group safety, excuse me. And then, I've heard FRA talk in the past about, the purposes of oversight too is to gather that data and to look at it to see what kind of gaps are in the program from a safety perspective, from a training perspective, and then determining if any modifications need to be made to any training components. Certainly in October, when we talk about refresher training and the regulation, that is FRA's assumption that this data would be used to inform how you do those refresher training requirements. We can, again, we'll dive into refresher training later, but that's another purpose of periodic oversight. But certainly, from a safety management perspective, the thing about periodic oversight is watching to see if people are performing the job safely. And 243 does limit the scope. It is limited to Part 214, to Part 218 and 220, but all of 214. In the past, we used to think about railroad workplace safety, and really all of us thought about on-track safety, maybe bridge worker safety sometimes too. But like Lance just talked about with the safety appliances, that's subpart D, right, where the standards for the RMMs exist. So you can really expand the scope of periodic oversight beyond just the on-track safety program, which certainly is very critical with red zone safety, spacing, things like that for the equipment, but also the actual equipment standards themselves. And then certainly 218, we think of switches and derails and blue signal, and then 220 with electronic devices and radio communication. Okay, then you're required to identify your qualified supervisors for each job category or group. And if you are a railroad, you can use your existing 217 program to meet this requirement. A couple of things on that. Like I just said, it's limited in scope, but it's all of those parts of 214 and 218 and 220. For those of you who are association members, last summer there was a smaller working committee, and we actually revisited again this spring. The association expanded the 217 template for their members just to ensure that 243 was properly covered. You know, I'm assuming class ones did the same type of work on their 217 programs, but historically those programs didn't quite cover the breadth of those three regulations. They might have covered other things too. And then for contractors, this is all new. I mean, railroads were used to doing operations testing, rule checks, efficiency tests, whatever we want to call it, but for a contractor, it's a new requirement to have a plan in place. And then there is an exception for locomotive engineers and conductors as it relates to periodic oversight, but that's really because they have their own unique requirements under parts 240 and 242 for the certifications. And then, yes, contractors, we'll talk about that. Again, I've spoken about contractors in the scope of 243 often, and I don't think I ever start with the definition. Really, a contractor means a person under contract with the railroad, including but not limited to the prime contractor or even a subcontractor. I just want to call out that sometimes I get questions, and I've heard FRA get questions on, you know, if it's a city person that's doing some stuff in the right of way, or, you know, something like that, and there is not a contract with the railroad, that person wouldn't be in scope, right? Because that is one piece of it. But if they are in contract with the railroad, I just want to call out that it also includes subcontractors as well. If you guys have questions on any of the stuff Lance presented, and when we start diving into 243, any questions for either of us, go ahead and chat those in, and we'll make sure that we address those towards the end of the presentation. Periodic oversight when contractors are involved. The regulation does allow railroads to train a contractor to provide periodic oversight as long as it's in their plan or program. And it says that railroads in the regulation aren't necessarily required to conduct periodic oversight for contractors if certain conditions are met. The contractor has more than 15 employees, and that's not 15 safety-related employees. I speak to a lot of contractors who are large organizations, and they're like, oh, we only have like 10 folks that actually do the railroad work, but they have maybe 500 employees. It's specific to the size of the organization, not to the size of the portion of the organization doing railroad work. And the contractor can train its own employees for safety-related duties. There are some instances I can think of railroads training their contractors and treating them, in a sense, more like an employee. They're often individuals working as 1099 contractors, and that is becoming more and more rare, I've seen in the last couple of years. But I can think of some instances where that would be true. And that the contractor also employs supervisors capable of performing the periodic oversight. These are examples of when a railroad would not be required to conduct the periodic oversight, but there is, and we've had a lot of conversations in industry where, certainly that can be contracted back to the contractor. My experience in working with both railroads and contractors is it's very, very rare you're going to see a railroad that's going to not put that responsibility back onto the contractor. Railroads are not required to conduct operational tests, but there's no prohibition against it. And again, this is specific from the 243 compliance manual, which is now starting to get a little dated. We do have an NPRM, but based on the current guidance in that compliance manual, that is what it says. Now, I will say in a lot of these sorts of situations where we're presenting and talking through some of the weeds, getting into the weeds of these regulations, I mean, railroads are ultimately going to be responsible for ensuring that operational testing, periodic oversight is being conducted, doing the due diligence and acting in good faith. And I have started telling folks things above and beyond maybe what would be required. For instance, not just getting that the contractor is compliant with 243 generically, but calling out periodic oversight specifically when they're getting that letter from the contractor of compliance. And I've even talked to some railroads about, it wouldn't be a bad idea to, in good faith, ask contractors to tell them what the periodic oversight, how many tests were performed on their property for the jobs that for the last year, something to that effect. Lance, did you have anything you wanted to add here?
No, I think that was good.
Okay.
It was, I guess I will add one thing as far as the previous slide, the
Yeah.
217 where it says to use there you go, that one, where the existing 217 program can be used to meet this requirement. I think you touched on it, but I just haven't. I've looked at several. I've just never seen one that complies. I haven't looked at what you all did from the short line side of it, the association, but the railroads that, it's not as simple as just saying I got a 217 program, I'm compliant. Just so everybody's aware of that, there's going to be some more work probably needs to be put into it.
Yeah, the 243 that I find is so confusing for people is they think of it as a training regulation, and then there's that big push for the FRA submission of individual programs. But then oftentimes there's a plan, like there should be a plan. The regulation calls that you have a plan. I'm just going to go back one more slide to call it out more specifically. That defines like how you're going to handle this part of the regulation. And you have to adopt and comply with a program to conduct periodic oversight. A lot of folks, they do their training submissions and they might have a CFR matrix of their occupational categories and subcategories, but what is that program? For the railroad, that program could be their Part 217 plan or program. For a contractor, they really need something, and I'm pretty certain that we've got, well, I know that there's something available for them, and I think it's the right one in the handout. Where was that? I will call it out that the FRA, I think it was last month, is that right, Lance, that you guys created some templates for contractors to help with that plan in that program document?
Yeah, it was probably more than a month ago now, but not an awful long time ago. It was pretty recent. And it's not really just for contractors. I think that's probably the audience that will use it the most, since railroads probably already have theirs somewhat established. But yeah, and I think I should put a link onto I can send a link onto did we have a link on this? I thought we did have a link.
I thought we did. I have a feeling that in the handout there's a link, and so everybody knows I have all your email addresses. I will send that out to the group so that you all get it in an email. I'll take care of it that way. Yeah.
Yeah, but it goes through. I mean, it's really in depth. It goes through every regulation that basically the way we did it said, if it's if we can measure it in the field, then we'll make a test for it. All regulations. We would take like train approach warning and anything that was measurable in the field that you could actually go out and ask a question and observe. We would put it into the checklist of a task. It really makes the testing pretty efficient.
Yeah, what I used to tell folks before you guys published that guidance, and it is very, very thorough for sure, was, if it's an observable behavior, you can then do a test on it. Observable behaviors likely are going to be what's in your on the job training checklist. You could definitely take a look at the FRA document because it is so thorough. But another good rule of thumb is look at how are you qualifying that employee on what safety related tasks through on the job training, and then that's probably a good hint of good opportunities for operational tests for this purpose.
That's a good point.
Let's see here. Yeah, I guess we're at that point. I don't know if there's anything else that needs to be said that I didn't think to mention with periodic oversight and railroad responsibility versus contractors. I would say at the end of the day, everybody's responsibility for their own compliance, but the railroad is contracting with those contractors, bringing them on the property. So there is sort of an assumption that you're going to do your due diligence to make sure that those contractors are compliant. Any questions, Holly, from the group?
Nope, I don't have any questions that have come in.
Okay. Well, here's our information if you guys do have questions, and then I will follow up certainly with a link to that document, that template that the FRA had published. I thought maybe it was late July, early August, something in that time frame, that goes through kind of what that periodic oversight, what an example of that looks like. And certainly most of you know me and know that I'm always happy to answer any questions, and Lance has been very gracious with his time today, and I'm sure would answer any questions you guys have if you reach out directly to him.
And one closing note too, from my perspective, these periodic oversight things, like, you want to get ahead of this, right? You don't want to be, unfortunately have an accident lingering, and then now we're starting to look and do we have this? That's way behind on that. Get out ahead of this. We're already behind if you haven't got one now, right? We're already supposed to have one. So make this a priority if you don't, and get this periodic oversight programs set up for your specific operations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say too that association members, we did create a plan document, a program document that ties all of the pieces of 243 together. That's out there available to you as well. Well, thank you again, everyone. Thank you, Lance. I really appreciate your time today too. Just let us know if you have any questions after the fact. Thank you.